So, continuing with speeches that were given a few years back, this was one I gave when I was in Hungary, so it starts with a little Hungarian anecdote. Relatively recently, I got a pearl of wisdom from a Hungarian friend of mine. It was the cherry season, just like now, in fact. And I was explained at the time that the vast majority of ripe cherries contain a small white worm that most people eat without noticing. So that day, as I was going about breaking open my breakfast cherries, opening them up one by one to make sure there were no foreign bodies, literally, in them, and any unwanted guests in my fruit, I then realized that, in fact, it wasn't the first time that I ran the risk of eating some kind of creepy crawly, and that indeed, a few years before that, I had willingly ventured into a gastronomic experiment. This is because, even more years back, I was in Mexico, somewhere between the desert and the Caribbean, and I walked into a shop and, spurred on by my adventurous and inquisitive cousin, I decided to taste a local delicacy. There were huge canvas bags at the entrance of the shop with small red objects that looked from a distance like some kind of crisp. I forgot to time myself. Just a sec. Coming up. And I knew exactly what I was about to do. And when we came out of the shop with my cousin, we had 30 or so of these specimens in our little bag, and we sat down to have a beer nearby, and we tried out these new munchies. They were crunchy, a little salty. They tasted pretty much as you might expect a dried grasshopper would. I wasn't mad about the taste myself, so I suppose it wasn't just out of squeamishness that I didn't eat too many, I just didn't really like the taste. And little did I know at the time that I was actually taking a step in the right direction. And this is because apparently eating more insects could help fight world hunger, according to a relatively recent UN report. According to this report by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, which is based in my hometown Rome, by the way, eating insects could help boost nutrition and reduce pollution. One of the reasons for this is that insects are everywhere. They reproduce quickly. They have a very high growth rate, and they have a very good feed conversion rate. Now, as I explained earlier, that's the idea of how efficient use you make of the stuff you eat and how you convert it into energy. One of the least efficient feed conversion rates is, for example, beef. When you eat a kilo of beef, the animal will have eaten 10 times its weight in cereal or other types of fodder. So it's not very efficient environmentally. According to the same report, wasps, beetles and other insects are currently underutilized as food for people and livestock. In other words, we're not eating as many insects as we should be. And insect farming is one of the many ways we can address both food and feed security. In other words, feeding humans and also feeding animals. Now, one of the other aspects that plead for a greater use of insects in our everyday diets is the nutritional value of insects. They have very high protein, fat and mineral content. To give you an example, for example, if we take minced beef as a reference, for 100 grams you get 27 grams of protein. You don't get any calcium whatsoever, however, and you get a decent amount of iron, 3.5 milligrams. Now if you compare that to a dung beetle, the dung beetle doesn't do quite as well in terms of protein, because it only has 17.2 grams compared to the 27 of the beef, as we mentioned earlier. However, it has 30 milligrams of calcium compared to, as I said, nothing in your meat. And it has more than double the iron of beef. Now, even better in terms of protein is the grasshopper, which has 20.6 grams, so close to what you would get from minced beef. And it has a whopping 35.2 milligrams of calcium, so doing much better than dung beetle. Has a fair amount of iron, more than beef. But to really beat them all, you have the caterpillar. The caterpillar is king because it has more protein than beef, just 1 gram more per 100 grams, and it has 35 milligrams of iron. So because of the nutritional value, and also for the other reasons I mentioned earlier, not only is it recommended that we eat more insects, but it has been stated that insects could be particularly important as a food supplement for undernourished children, because they have a very quick effect on the body. As we were saying earlier, talking about the feed conversion rate, insects are also extremely efficient in converting feed into edible meat. Crickets, for example, need 12 times less feed than cattle to produce the same amount of protein, according to this report. The other aspect, which I mentioned earlier, is the environmental dimension. The vast majority of insects are likely to produce fewer environmentally harmful greenhouse gases compared to most livestock. For example, the ammonia emissions associated with insect rearing are far, far lower than those linked to conventional livestock, such as pigs, for example. Now, to avoid having a too ethnocentric view of things, moving away from Europe, we have to recognize that, in fact, eating insects is very commonplace in many parts of the world. But still, it is a bit of a shock for many Westerners. This UN report suggests that the food industry has a role to play, and it should help raising the status of insects by including them, for example, in new recipes and adding them to restaurant menus. It's worthwhile noting, in fact, that, again, outside of Europe, in some places, certain insects are considered to be true delicacies. For example, certain types of caterpillar in southern Africa are considered to be luxuries and command very high prices indeed. Now, where can we actually get all these insects from? Well, most edible insects are gathered in forests, and they then serve niche markets. And you might ask, well, what are the cons? Surely there must be something that speaks against eating all these insects. Well, apparently the only real obstacle that we're facing is quite simply consumer disgust. And this might include some of you. It certainly includes me to a certain extent. And again, consumer disgust mainly in Western countries. So, although the idea might sound shocking, I think that we could at least start by one step down in the food chain, so feeding insects to other animals we're rearing. So give them some kind of food which environmentally has less of a heavy footprint compared to, for example, traditional cereals like soybean or maize or wheat. One of the ideas, which I found quite funny, is that we could feed caterpillars to pigs. Now, we know that pigs are not too picky when it comes to food, so I reckon they would probably be happy with a dung beetle too, but for some reason the report suggests caterpillars. If we did this, then we would be reducing the amount of cereals in the pig's diet. We would be able to therefore free up some farmland for crops to be fed to humans rather than animals. And this is also something which is good from the point of view of the feed conversion rate, which I mentioned earlier. Now, I recognize that this idea might not appeal to all of you, but let's not forget that what is at stake is the sustainability of what we are eating now, and this issue will become far more pressing in the future. Indeed, it will be unavoidable that we find a way of including some kind of insect in our diet. And finally, the report concludes by saying that over 2 billion people worldwide already supplement their diet with insects. And if so many do so already, surely they can't be wrong. So, since Federica announced that we will be having a picnic at the end of the year, I challenge all of you to bring some kind of edible insect. And I promise I will do my best to eat at least 1 or 2. Until then, enjoy the hunt.